This is the rib of the animal. This is this part of the animal, and it doesn't get a lot of exercise, so it eats very tender. If you look at the side, there's these kernels of fat that baste this meat as it cooks and keeps it really moist. What I've done is I've taken this meat off of the rib bones. There's the rib bones right there, and I cut it off of the rib bones. And then what I'm going to do is tie it back onto the ribs. So those ribs will act like a little rack. They'll also lend flavor to this meat, but it will be easier for me to deal with this later on. If you go to your butcher, you can ask them to do it for you. Now, what your butcher will do, and I'm going to do it right here, is they will tie the meat back onto the bone. So let me take care of that right now. And that piece of meat is ready to go into the oven, but for the fact that I haven't seasoned it yet. I don't need a rack in my roasting pan because it has the rack that is the bones. I'm going to season it pretty assertively with salt. This is a big piece of meat, so don't be shy. Sometimes I will add thyme to my mix. Other times I like to put garlic on. Some people like rosemary. But we're going to start with salt and pepper because I think that is the basic seasoning and the one that we should pay attention to right here. I'm going to pick up all this extra meat and the salt, and that is ready to go into the oven. It will cook with the hot air that circulates around it. I'm going to start it at a relatively high temperature and then turn it right down and roast it at about 350 degrees. A piece of meat like this will probably take about an hour and a half to an hour and 3/4, and by the time it comes out, it will have been in the oven long enough that it will be nice and brown. Okay, I've got the prime rib out of the oven. It cooked for about an hour and 3/4, and I took it out of the oven at an internal temperature of 125 degrees Fahrenheit. That's an important number. This is far too expensive a piece of meat to miss. So 125 degrees, I took it out of the oven, and I'm going to let it sit then for about a half an hour. What will happen initially is that the heat that's inherent in this piece of meat will have to dissipate. Some of it will pass off into the cool of the room, and some of it will carry on to the center of the meat and give it an extra 10 degrees or so of cooking. When you take the temperature on a piece of meat like this, make sure that the probe is not hitting a bone, because the bones will carry the heat of the oven into this meat much more effectively. Likewise, make sure it's not buried in a big piece of fat, but instead in the thickest part of the meat, in the center of the meat. All right, so this is rested now for about a half an hour, and I'm going to lift it up and transfer it over to the cutting board. What I would like to do is take all the strings off that I tied up earlier, and I'm going to pull all of those strings and we'll get them discarded. So I set those aside, and if you'll recall, I took this off the bone before it went into the oven. So what was our rack, the bones, separates very, very easily from the meat that I have here. Now, what I want to do is slice a little bit of this meat for you so we can see the quality of the job that we've done. There is a rib of beef. I have a second rib here that came out of the oven pretty quickly. It hasn't had much of an opportunity to rest yet. And so I'm going to carve this one as well. And likely what we will see is some of the juices will flow out of this meat because it hasn't had a chance to rest. Again, we'll take all the strings off and discard those. The bones can come off very, very easily. And you can see it's still steaming. And what I'm going to do is cut my first slice. And another. As you can see, the juices are just flowing out of this meat. I'm using my knife to collect them, but you can see them running down the knife and onto the board. If we all agree we like nice, juicy prime rib, then all of these juices are lost to us. You might take a piece of bread and mop them up off the board. That's the importance of letting meat rest.